When a spirited stray dog named Alia plunges into a muddy pit, her life is at stake. Hit subscribe to The Unusual and stay tuned for this heart-stopping story. Alia, Alia, called the wife from the porch. The dog peeked out from behind the corner of the house, hesitating to approach. Alia struggled to cope with conflict. She had been a stray before a kind person took her to a shelter. There, she was nurtured with love, learning the meaning of warmth and companionship. But soon, her new owner received an enticing job offer overseas. With no time to get the necessary documents for Alia, she had to leave the dog at her parents' rural home. The drastic change in environment highlighted the stark contrast between Alia's former home and her current one. Unlike the cramped apartment where she could nap on couches and observe family meals, the rural home imposed many restrictions. Alia was often confused, unsure if she was being called or scolded for something. They wouldn't even let her inside. She had to live outdoors with her bed under the porch awning. The wife pleaded with her parents to build a doghouse for Alia, but her father refused. "I'm not going out of my way for a dog. Building a shelter for the cows or fixing the fence for the chickens makes more sense. They at least provide something in return. But a dog? What's the point? If one passes away, you can always find another," he replied. As a result, Alia remained without the comfort of a doghouse. The husband suggested putting her on a leash, but the wife vehemently opposed. She secured her parents' promise that they wouldn't keep Alia tied up. She swore to take Alia back with her as soon as she arranged her living situation overseas. Her parents reluctantly agreed. However, it turned out that the wife's new job required constant travel, complicating matters further. Although Alia had a home, there was no one to care for her during their outings. Consequently, Alia found herself living with her owner's parents. It was a tough adjustment for Alia. She wasn't used to the environment, and even the other animals in the yard weren't welcoming. The goats tried to butt heads with her, the chickens pecked at her, and the family cat hissed fiercely, prompting Alia to keep her distance. The family dog felt threatened the moment he saw her. Unlike Alia, who had different food, the family dog was always on a leash, a luxury he yearned for. Thus, he barked aggressively and even attempted to attack Alia, who wisely kept her distance, fearful of his sharp teeth. In the initial days, Alia lingered around her owner's parents, hoping for some protection. However, their constant grumbling, shouting, and occasional aggression distressed her. She often got underfoot, which annoyed them further. As a result, Alia sought refuge outside the yard, where no one would scold or attack her. The fence had numerous broken panels, large enough for even a Saint Bernard to squeeze through, let alone Alia. Consequently, slipping through the fence was easy for her. She spent her days exploring the neighborhood and would return only at night or for meals. Initially, Alia's adventures were limited to the empty neighboring lots. Eventually, she roamed across the fields, relishing her newfound freedom and joyfully exploring untraveled paths. One day, after returning for lunch, Alia heard her owner calling her and dashed eagerly into the yard. As she entered, she was met with a barrage of shouts and screams that startled her. She was no stranger to such disputes. Typically, people would express their frustrations through whatever was readily available after a ruckus. Unfortunately, Alia had often been on the receiving end of these instances, still nursing bruises from a previous encounter. Therefore, she stealthily slipped out of sight, darting to the other side of the house and onto the street, leading into a vast expanse. The homes were spaced out, surrounded by fields. The locals, considering themselves farmers, monitored their lands vigilantly. Consequently, Alia trotted deeper into the unplowed meadow. Though hunger gnawed at her belly, she was determined to avoid her owner's wrath. Thus, she traversed the meadow, sniffing for something edible in her discontent. The dirt beneath her paws and the damp grass from the prior day's rain didn't deter her. Although her paws were filthy, she remained calm. Her new household wasn't concerned with cleanliness. After all, she wouldn't be entering their home. Suddenly, her sensitive nose detected an unfamiliar scent, clearly from a living creature she hadn't encountered before. Driven by curiosity, she moved forward. Before her lay a massive muddy puddle, but this didn't stop her. The source of the intriguing scent was just beyond the obstacle. There was no time for a detour, so Alia sprinted through the mud. After her initial leap, she lost her balance. Her paws slipped in the watery dirt, and when she tried to stop, she found herself propelled into the middle of the muck. To her surprise, it wasn't just a pool of mud, but a full-fledged marsh. The rain had soaked the ground, filling a depression with a mixture of dirt and water. Being a small dog, Alia was almost swallowed whole by the viscous mess upon landing in the pit. Her desperate attempts to find solid ground were futile as her paws scrambled in all directions. She kept sinking deeper. In a daring bid to escape, she began to swim. She had managed it successfully in the past, but the muck, unlike water, hindered her efforts. The sticky substance clung to her tenaciously. She made several attempts but couldn't reach solid ground. As her paws began to ache from the struggle, she ceased her efforts. Whimpering softly, she hoped to attract help. Unfortunately, she had wandered too far from human settlements, and the humans' less sensitive hearing couldn't pick up her cries. Alia barked and howled until her voice broke. The only choice left for the forsaken creature was to lie submerged in the mud up to her ears and wait for an unfortunate end. Pavel, like many in the village, was a farmer, but on a larger scale. He rented substantial tracts of land around the village and employed workers for cultivation. Problems did arise, however. Some labored tirelessly year-round, while others were either rowdy or excessively lazy. Pavel kept a close watch on the latter group. Occasionally, he would unexpectedly arrive for a surprise inspection right in the middle of the day to observe their productivity. Knowing this pattern, the workers devised a plan to quickly transmit information. No sooner did Pavel drive through the occupied lands than a worker would cry out, warning the others, prompting them to eagerly mount their tractors and harvesters. By the time Pavel arrived for his unannounced inspection, everything appeared industrious, but it was clear that productivity was low. Determined to outsmart the deceptive workers, Pavel chose to sneak from the orchards, across the plains, and directly into the fields. This walk was lengthy, but its worth was evident in the results. He found several workers gathered under a tree, engrossed in a card game. Sternly, he reproached them, threatening termination if they didn't complete their task by sundown. Then he set off on his long journey home. At this point, he regretted his decision to forgo his bike. Walking allowed him a more direct route, but halfway across the field, he was startled by faint, mysterious sounds. This strange amalgamation of noises was neither a whimper nor a pant, but something else entirely. When he turned toward the sounds, he was stunned by the sight that welcomed him, a dog's head protruding from the center of a massive muddy puddle. The animal, in a pitiful state, looked at Pavel with a mix of desperation and hope that sent a shiver down his spine. "Easy now," he gestured soothingly. "I'm going to get you out." The dog seemed to perk up, raising its head above the surface of the mud, paddling its legs, but to no avail. Pavel concluded that entering the mud pit would yield no positive results, so he decided to search for something he could use to help the poor creature. Unfortunately, there was nothing in sight other than the surrounding grass. "Hold on, buddy, I'll be back soon," he told the distressed dog. Pavel hurried toward the nearest house, familiar to everyone in the village, and requested a wide plank. The owners, efficient and prepared, quickly provided the plank. Soon, Pavel was back at the muddy pit, plank in hand. He tossed it across and carefully made his way to the center of the mud pool, where the struggling dog was trapped. Pulling the dog out was a real challenge, as the mud clung to the animal's once lively body, refusing to release its grip. Pavel's fingers kept slipping off the dog's lethargic, powerless frame. With no other option, he rolled up his sleeves and plunged his hands into the muck, trying to grasp the creature under its armpits. The mud rendered the small dog immovable. The plank even wobbled beneath his feet. At one point, Pavel lost his footing, but skillfully adjusted to avoid tumbling into the mire. The dog, feeling relieved, began to squirm and lick the hands of its rescuer, making the situation even trickier. The slippery creature, drenched in mud, nearly flew back into the muck due to its overflowing emotions. Yet Pavel managed. He set the dog on the ground. Completely exhausted, Alia couldn't move. She collapsed on the grass, not even attempting to rise. "Hey, what's the matter with you?" Pavel exclaimed with concern. He picked some grass and cleaned the dirt off the dog's coat. Almost immediately, Alia began to perk up. She even made an effort to stand. Her weary legs wobbled but held. Overjoyed, the dog cozied up to the man. "Ah, no way," Pavel groaned, having tried so hard to stay clean. And there it happened. His pants got muddied, but he couldn't hold a grudge against the dog. The gratitude and joy on her face were so profound that he had no doubts. She hadn't meant to soil him. Pavel picked up the plank that still needed returning and started his journey back. Meanwhile, Alia darted home via a different route. Pavel's appearance attracted the attention of all passers-by. He had to recount the dog rescue story multiple times. In the village, news spreads quickly, so the tale of the animal rescue reached Alia's owners almost immediately upon her return. Animated discussions took place regarding the necessity of a pen or a leash. Ultimately, Alia was given a bath and taken to express gratitude to Pavel. He had performed a kind deed, and her owners didn't want to appear ungrateful in front of a respected village inhabitant. Pavel was astonished to see his classmates' parents at the doorway. He was even more surprised to discover that the beautiful dog beside them was the same miserable creature who had almost drowned in the mud. Earlier, he had only seen a relatively clean portion of her face, but now he could fully appreciate Alia's creamy color. "Thank you for saving our Asechka," the owner said, holding on to the dog's leash to prevent her from wandering off. "Asechka? That's quite an unusual name for a dog," Pavel remarked politely. "It's the name our daughter gave her. The dog is hers, but she currently stays with us. She's a handful, always running around as she pleases. It's all right. We'll put her on a leash so she learns to focus on what's important," Pavel replied, observing the canine. Her eyes conveyed so much pleading that it tugged at his heartstrings. Alia ambled toward him, but the hostess yanked the lead again, causing her to retreat. The canine instantly coiled her tail between her legs, dropped her gaze, and flattened her ears. After discussing with the lady, Pavel was left with a somewhat unsettling feeling. The dog appeared to be well cared for, nurtured and fed, yet she didn't seem happy about it. Pavel managed to find his old schoolmate on a social media platform. She frequently posted snapshots from various towns she visited for work. Pavel praised her exciting lifestyle and inquired about the dog. His classmate reiterated the same reasoning her mother had given. "I don't have time to care for the pet. My parents are doting on Alia pretty well. She gets plenty of outdoor time. She's better off in the countryside." Pavel read through the messages, unable to contain his dissent. He wrote about when and where he first met Alia. His classmate was taken aback. It seemed she was unaware that her pet had outdoor freedom and genuinely believed Alia was sheltered indoors during the night. For some time, the girl vanished from the social media sphere, likely having a discussion with her parents. Then she resurfaced with an unexpected request. Her schoolmate implored Pavel for assistance. A pet required proper documentation to relocate overseas. Her parents refused to make a city trip for the dog, prompting her to ask Pavel for help. She promised to cover all costs related to the procedure and even provide additional compensation for his time. Pavel hesitated but eventually agreed. They settled that his classmate would only pay the veterinarian for his services, and Pavel's involvement would be purely out of goodwill. The next day, he arrived for Alia and met the disgruntled parents of his old classmate. The mother, barely tolerating the dog's presence in the summer kitchen, handed the leash to Pavel and left in a huff. The father hinted at the root of his wife's foul mood. Their daughter had created quite a stir with them yesterday, insisting on immediate custody of the pet. The father grumbled about their predicament, stating that if only they had brought the dog along initially, there wouldn't be any fuss. Instead, she had abandoned it with them and gone overseas herself. Now, they were left to worry about her pet, which added to their own issues. "And now you've been dragged into this," he added. True, if she had genuinely wanted that troublesome carpet, she would have taken it herself a long time ago. Prudently, Pavel chose to remain silent. He didn't see either side of the disagreement as justified, but he refrained from voicing his opinion. Instead, he and Alia drove into town, where he sorted out the necessary paperwork for her to travel internationally. The good news was that Alia had already been vaccinated, so there was no need for further action. Alia regarded Pavel as her protector, leaning against his leg for comfort. Although she wasn't thrilled about the vet visit, she bravely endured the checkup under the gentle whisper of her rescuer. The main trouble turned out to be arranging for Alia to be transported. Her owner found someone willing to drive the dog across the border, but they still needed to get to this person. This was where Pavel couldn't assist, as he couldn't leave his farm during the busy season, especially since the workers required constant attention. So he reached out to some friends in the city. One was about to depart on vacation and agreed to deliver Alia to the designated city. Thus began the remarkable journey of the dog. In her life, she had never ventured further than the local green space. Now she was faced with a multi-thousand-kilometer trip, surrounded by strangers. To avoid issues, Pavel fitted Alia with a muzzle and leash, and he bought her a new bowl since her old one had become unusable during her outdoor stay. Parting was sorrowful. In a matter of days, Alia had formed a strong bond with Pavel. He didn't want to return her to his classmates' parents, fearing they might lose Alia again. This led him to keep her. She slept in his entranceway, a significant improvement from the nights spent outside. Alia looked at Pavel as if he were a hero. "You'll soon be back with your family," he tried to comfort her, although she didn't understand his words. She stared, fearful at the strangers in their unfamiliar vehicle. Confused about why she was being abandoned yet again, especially after her rescue, Alia held on to hope that Pavel might change his mind. She gazed into his eyes with a mournful whimper, staying close to his legs. Nevertheless, Pavel placed Alia in the stranger's vehicle and bid her farewell. Alia barely had a chance to acclimate to the new individuals. They settled into the front seats, pausing only once during the entire trip to give the pup water and let her relieve herself. Then, to Alia's shock, she was transferred to another vehicle with a different person. She spent more time traveling with this man. He took her out for walks 3 times, provided her with food and water, and they even slept in the vehicle overnight. The next day, Alia arrived in an unfamiliar, large city. She curiously sniffed around the new scents and suddenly picked up a familiar aroma. Alia cocked her head from side to side and came to an abrupt stop. She couldn't trust her eyes. Approaching her was her owner, the same person who had noticed the little puppy in the shelter and brought her home. Alia froze momentarily before making a sudden leap that caused her handler to lose grip on the leash. Alia bolted toward her owner, leaping into the woman's arms and nearly knocking her over. The lady could hardly hold on to her pet. The dog wriggled, whimpered, and expressed her joy, trying to show her affection in every way possible. "I'm just as thrilled to see you," the woman chuckled in response. After interacting with the transporter, they returned home. Alia walked proudly, head held high, marking the strange city as her own. Her owner's home was a small apartment, and while it felt somewhat restrictive for Alia, she was still elated. The most important fact was that she was with her owner, yet many challenges lay ahead. The woman frequently had to travel for work and couldn't always take her pet along. This meant that sometimes she would resort to a pet boarding facility or ask her neighbor to care for Alia. Regardless, each time Alia faithfully awaited her return, trusting that her owner would never abandon her permanently. The woman realized that despite significant life changes, one must not neglect old friends. No creature except a dog would welcome you home with such enthusiasm. Only your pet can and will dedicate their time to you, showering you with unconditional love, regardless of your flaws and mistakes. It's wrong to offload your responsibilities onto others. Even the closest individuals can disappoint you. Neglecting your pet endangers its well-being.